Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Nobody podcast. I really appreciate you all listening again today. Today, I have a special guest, Nigel, who's a good friend of mine. Known each other, I guess, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, a couple of years,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, now, like thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's been several years now. That's great. Have him on today, and before I really hit it off with any questions, I just want him to introduce himself.
I'm Nigel. Carlos asked me before whether it was just Nigel, which is easier sometimes. I like to say it's like Madonna or Seal or Pele, but I do actually have a last name. My last name is Lysa, which is almost indecipherable when you see it on the page, but it's an Irish name. It's much longer in Irish. It's Macula Isakta, which somehow got anglicized down to Lysa, and that's me.
Nice. I feel like I just discovered a relic or something. I shouldn't have listened to that. Like something's gonna happen.
Yeah, that will be the best of times and the worst of times for you.
Oh, okay. Well, looking forward to that. So, Nigel, I have a couple questions to ask you. But first, I just want to start off with, tell us your story. Tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself so we get to know you.
Sure. It's always interesting where you start with those things. I guess if you
Earth?
Earth, right. So it's good. Well, I mean, depends what you mean by Earth, right? Is it the internal or the external? But if you can't tell by the brogue and by me mentioning the last name, I actually am Irish originally. I'm from Dublin and grew up there, lived throughout Europe when we were younger, and then came back to Ireland, moved around a lot, went to a couple of different schools, played a lot of rugby. It was pretty good. I actually played underage for my country at under 19 level. And then when I was done with that and I finished college, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And I was visiting my sister in New York. And I was going to say literally walking down the street, but that's not true because I was walking down the Coney Island boardwalk and I got stopped by a man named Daniel Peddle, who was kind of like my Virgil in my story. He just brought me into this strange world of modeling and acting and a completely alternate reality for me from an individual who went to like a rugby school and graduated business school. I did a bachelor's of commerce and I majored in finance. And, there was a pretty routine kind of cookie cutter existence laid out for me. And things just went a different way. And that day was a big day as far as the whole fork in the road for me, taking that and being open to it and then going off in a completely different direction, to the point where as I talk to you, I am in Los Angeles right now with my lovely wife Melanie, who is in the other room, and I am pursuing a career in filmmaking. I'm an actor and a writer. I've written a movie with a buddy of mine. It's an indie film. We produced it ourselves. And that was a great adventure in and of itself. And just doing the deal out here, studying the craft of acting constantly. I actually had one class earlier today. I got one after this. And just trying to grind and, do what I got to do and do any auditions when I go.
Nice. That was a lot to take in. I guess I'm gonna have to break it down.
I'm Irish. We like to talk, man.
I mean, that's the goal here. I really hope you can. Rugby, huh? So
yeah.
If you play, did you ever have hopes to maybe continuing playing rugby at some point, or?
Yeah. I think that's like well, like it was already done and dusted at that stage, I think. Because I'd graduated. I think I had just turned 21, or I was 20 or turning 21, somewhere around there. I was 20 when I graduated.
Years?
Yeah, at that stage, like the way things were, the lay of the land, I had a couple of injuries that I picked up, and nothing kind of popped at that stage. As far as, well, my back had popped, unfortunately, but as far as really getting into like a feeder system, and just the hunger for it had kind of gone out of me too. I could have stuck around. Maybe there was a chance, but it just wasn't what it once was. I think, like most kids, when you grow up playing a sport, the dream is to play that sport professionally. And I definitely had that. And I went to like the best school in the country for that. Like, we were like
Wow.
one of the top teams, like almost every year. Like we won the equivalent of state, and like I represented my country then the next year, in the first year in college. And then, like I was in the mixer, but it wasn't meant to be, and a lot of things have to go right for people to be professional athletes. That's the thing that you don't necessarily know. Like you see these guys that are at the top, whether in American football or basketball. But I think some of like the best rugby players that I ever played with, like never made it all the way, either because of injuries or just because they didn't have the mindset of, okay, I have to be dedicated. I have to make sacrifices so that I can really go after this thing. Some of the most talented individuals that just have this sporting intelligence and this skill where they make a game look beautiful by the way they play it. And they really just like have you in this state of awe when you're watching them. Just like it didn't happen for them, and it's just kind of, so, and in a way it feels like there's this element of fate sometimes about it. For someone who doesn't necessarily believe that, I'm not a fatalist, I don't think everything's a done deal. I believe in free will, but there is this aspect of like, okay, it just wasn't meant to be.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to probably ask a very ignorant question, that because I don't really understand the sport rugby, really. I just watch it. It just looks really rough. Is in terms of rugby versus football, is rugby like more dangerous? Is they have no pads?
Do you mean American football?
Yes, American football.
Okay, right.
That's true. I should be saying American football since you're from Europe. Bad.
Listen, I say soccer too, just to wind people up back home. They get their backs up about it. But I think like, especially now, because rugby's been a professional sport for, I think, about 16, 17 years. Like it was pretty late. It was amateur, I think, up until the early to mid 90s. The size of the guys that are playing rugby now is equaling the size of the guys that play American football. The one thing about rugby is that it's a continuous game. So it's like, to a degree, the intensity lessens over the course of the game. Like, don't get me wrong, these guys go hard for the full 80 minutes. Like, it's 80 minutes of play of rugby. It's 40 minutes and then a halftime and then 40 minutes. But because you can be in a play for 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on the style of the game, there's going to be a level of fatigue going on there. Like, these big guys still have to get their big bodies around the field, so it lessens a little bit. Whereas in American football, these guys are fresh pretty much every play. Obviously you're going to fatigue because you're going all out the whole time. It's maybe slightly more anaerobic, but I mean, like, 2 sets of incredible athletes that are basically, at war with each other for the length of 2 games. I'd love to get the actual injuries stacked up against each other. I wouldn't say they'd be too different, it's because there's no pads, but like nobody wears a helmet either. There's like a little foam padding scrum cap that you can have, which I think I read recently that doesn't actually even really make a difference as far as concussions. So it's like, you just wear it so that you don't get cuts on your head, or just to like keep your ears pinned back. Like, I have like a little bit of a cauliflower ear from playing myself, because those things just happen, whether it's an impact or friction wear over time. So, people are like, oh, rugby, that's so tough. And it is, trust me, like, I've had my fair share of injuries, but it's, I think even something like soccer, like those guys get like all sorts of injuries. It just tends to be like lower body, I think, a lot of the time. Sometimes they'll get shoulder, certain concussions, they'll go up with a clash of heads, but, they'll rip knees, they'll do, ACLs, MCLs, and throw out their lower back, all that kind of jazz.
Yeah, I would definitely have been remiss if I didn't ask you about the rugby, even though that's not the topic today. I just need to ask, know. Right? It's just so curious. So you talked about your actual journey to doing your degree. What was it in business?
Yeah, Bachelor of Commerce.
So what was your original intention with that degree before you got found as this most beautiful man in the world?
Be 4th runner-up in the whatever the provincial theater. I wasn't really sure, to be honest with you, because I never really saw myself having a regular job, even though I'd like done an internship or two. Um, I wasn't sure what was going to be in store for me. And, like over the course of my degree, different things caught my interest. And it was actually strange. The further my degree went on, the more I realized that I actually didn't want to have anything to do with working in it professionally. One of the things that really sparked my interest was when we started looking at behavioral economics. And it was a field that was kind of like founded by, I think it's Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And that was so fascinating to me. And that was like what I wanted to try and understand, versus like economics, like never really interested me, because the whole premise, the fundamental basis of economics is that people think rationally, right? And I'm like, people aren't rational thinkers. This is great. Like, what? This just makes no sense. Like, why is this the foundation of everything? Like, I get it. Like, for 80, 90% of the time, people do for the most part. And then you can do things and figuring out elasticity and all the rest of it. Yeah. But that part of it really didn't make sense to me. And then the money management stuff, the more I learned, it was just, like all the moral hazard that was involved, where it's like, it's in your interest to get as big as possible so that they don't want you to fail. So that, like, I graduated in 2007, which was not a great time to graduate. It turned out, 07, 08, like the bottom fell out of not just the market, but the whole world for a while, right? They called it the Great Recession. And we were learning just up to that about all these different things when it was in our portfolio management class or in treasury management, or getting these different examples and these different case studies of like whether it was John Merriweather, long-term capital management, or whether it was, the Orange County, whatever their bursar, whatever they call that. But basically, like, it was a position that you campaigned for as if it was a political position, but it was the treasurer of Orange County's funds. And like, there's been a couple of times in the past 20 or 30 years where they'd gone bust, because it was not just misappropriation, like, like no one was feeding. It was just allocation, people just were using funds that should have been secure, that should have been, in bonds, and should have been steady and reliable. And they were like betting on different things, and they got away with it for a long period of time because the market went a certain direction, then went the other direction. They got their hat in their hand, and things aren't so good. So more and more, when I saw that, I thought, I actually really don't want to do this. And that's not a popular thing, like, that's not something that people are like, you know what, like, follow your dreams and follow your heart. Like, you're in a business degree. It's like the most competitive program to get into in the country. Basically, I think it was like, maybe there was like a business and legal degree that was slightly harder to get into, but it was like, this was like number one on like most people's lists. Like, the educational system in Ireland is different. There's no interview or anything like that. Like, it's purely on test scores. You sit your tests at the end of the year. It's a state examination. There's outside people come in to monitor. And like, you either do well enough in those tests or you don't. And like, you can go back next year and do it again, but you lose a full year, or you settle for something that you didn't actually want to do. And now I didn't know that you can go and you can transfer and you can do all these different things, but there's a lot of pressure on us to, like, you either get it or you don't. So I got it, and I was in, and I was doing the deal. But the more I learned, the less enthused I was to go down that particular path. And, like, friends of mine, I'd kind of say it to them, and they'd be like, yeah, but you'll find something, or whatever it was. It just like, I kind of just needed to go for a bit of a wander, and try and find something that not just interested me, but that, like, I felt good about doing. Not that I necessarily felt like, oh, like, hang on, like, I'm going to start modeling, that's going to save the world. But like, at least it was something that, like, allowed me to travel and not get put into like a box in a cubicle. And like, there you go, like, the next 40, 50 years of your life is going to be that. And then you're just going to lather, rinse, repeat, and you're just going to perpetuate whatever cycle you're in. And, all these things that, are flawed and faulty and that you don't want to be involved in, you're going to have to just stomach. Basically, you're just going to have to eat. and I didn't want to do that. And I think the only reason that I was able to not go down that path, one was the opportunity of like just being in the right place at the right time, like randomly walking down a boardwalk, meeting up with a couple of guys. I think I was drinking at the time, so I think I had I was coming with the beer supply for a couple of guys that we were just going to go drink on the beach. It was like beautiful summer's day, and the only that gave me the opportunity to not go down this road. It was interesting, it was enough, it was acceptable. But okay, yeah, go out. You can go after that. That's potentially rewarding, and it's like you kind of like get away with doing something different in that sense. And then the other one was the fact that my father had passed away. My freshman year in college, it was like October 22nd, 2004. So I was like almost 2 months into college, 6 weeks, 2 months into college, and he passed away suddenly. He died of a heart attack at home. And he was obviously like a really big influence in my life, but he was also someone who, like, if he had said, Nigel, this is what you're doing, that's what I was going to be doing. Right. So it afforded me this opportunity to start to strike out and, like, in a sense, figure things out for myself, as imperfect as it was, but to just get outside of whatever the box was, or to get off whatever that particular track was, and to like beat a new path for myself. So it's a strange thing to reflect on, to think, oh yeah, what allowed me to be able to go and do this and like go on this particular path, to bring it back to that moment, which, it's a pretty seminal moment in my life, but I have been able to, at least in my own mind, draw the line between those two things, or connect those two actions and those two emotions.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate that. So walk me through this. So you graduated and then you went to your sister's, right?
Yeah, she was living in New York at the time. Yeah, she was living in Queens.
Okay. Now, after you graduated and went to her, was that a moment where you were trying to figure out your life, like what you wanted to do? Was there a purpose that you visited her, that it all led to, being found in Coney Island?
Yeah. I had always thought, for whatever reason, that I was going to live in America. I didn't know why or how or what it was going to be. Part of it, I think, was the mindset. Like, in Ireland, we're really good at lots of things, right? And like certain things, like we're really good at grieving. Like, we're like probably one of the world's best at grieving. Like, we have the format, like Catholic Ireland, people know how to do a wake. They know what to say. We have like a set. It's like, I'm so sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry for your troubles. That's like kind of the direct Irish translation for what you say in Irish. Is like, Ní Bhfuil the Tribloids. Like, it's like, I don't like your trouble. I don't like your sorrow. And like, people just like come together and they're like so supportive and incredible and helpful and all the rest of it. Like, excellent at that. And it might be different now. I was actually only back for the first time in like 10, 11 years. In August, Melanie went over with me I more went over with her, to be honest. It was more her trip. But she got to meet in person my family for the first time, because she hadn't met them prior to COVID and all the restrictions and the rest of it. So we actually sneak attacked everybody individually. We surprised everyone at their respective abodes, and it was a pretty epic trip. But Irish people have this thing that they suffer from. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's called tall poppy syndrome. So,
no, what is that?
In a field of poppies, if one poppy gets above the rest and it's getting more sunlight and it's getting more energy, the poppies around it drain the nutrients from the soil around that poppy to bring it back down to the same level as the rest of them, so that it's getting the same amount of sun as the rest, right? So, like, I had like lengthy discussions with different friends of mine probably before I left, and then I actually came back for a little while after I had left. I started doing a master's, and then like pretty much the same thing again. So you have to relearn that lesson, right? It's kind of like almost like the hero's journey. It's like the call to adventure, and then it's the refusal, and then it's, it's like these falterings, and then it was like, okay, I got to go back off. But yeah, like you're doing something different. You have a different mindset. You have a different attitude. Hopefully, it's different now. It probably is, but I just felt like people didn't encourage you to explore, to really like experiment and be creative. It was just like, here are the things that you can do. Go do one of those, and like, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a carpenter, you're a whatever, and that's what you are, and we're just going to put you in that category, and that's that squared away. Don't make any noise, don't bother us. So like, for me, America always appealed to me because it was the opposite. It was this can-do attitude. It was this mentality of like, if you work hard enough, like, you're going to get there eventually. Like, if you are willing to sacrifice, if you're willing to pay the cost, like, you're going to get whatever it is that you go after. And that's so aspirational and so inspirational. And it was something that always attracted me. And for any period that I could. So there's a visa called a J1 visa, where you can work and travel in America if you're a student. So I got that one a bunch of times where I came on vacation or whatever I could. I spent as much time in America as I could. So summers in college were spent over here, essentially. I think like every single birthday I've had since I was 18, bar maybe one. I think like my 24th birthday was in London. I think maybe 23rd or 24th too, something like that. Like, that's the only one I've missed. So I've always just like felt this pull, and I think those are the strongest kind of influence and factors. Like those like pull factors are always the things that, like, almost like this like little like tractor beam, like I don't really know, but I was going that way. And I was just like essentially on vacation, just blowing off some steam after finishing college, and I hadn't like completely given up on the rugby, but it was mostly done. So I think I was just drinking a lot, going out, having a good time, and spending time with my sister and then a couple other buddies, like one from college and then another group of lads that I had met a couple of summers before in South Carolina, down in Myrtle Beach. We're knocking around. Actually, they live like a couple of blocks from me. In the end, it was pretty funny, small world. So I was actually going out to meet those guys at the beach when Daniel Peddle stopped me, and my world changed forever.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Do you think, leading up to this moment that changed your life, and then after, has your degree at any point been relevant to you? And there's a reason why I'm asking, because you're not the first person, and including your own wife, is not in the degree or in the field that your degree is in, right? And that's the point that sometimes I'm trying to tell people through my episodes and my interviews, is like, you don't have to necessarily get a degree. That's one. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do what your degree says you have to do. There's definitely things you can do. And that's the point, is that you need to expand yourself. And you're the second person to describe it the same way, almost identical to a different person who said, yeah, we all pigeonhole ourselves to doctor, lawyer, like there's nothing beyond that, but there's plenty of opportunities beyond that. So that's why I asked you that question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So it's just about the opportunities. And well, to be fair, I think a business degree plays a role at any point in your life as you get older too, especially if you're doing your own independent things, like your indie film, which is really interesting. And, I don't want to pry too much, but you think you could talk about it for a little bit? Like, how was that experience of doing something like that?
Yeah, sure. And I think I can also like answer the other question too. And part of it, I think like, for my own personal finances, which up until like the last few years have been like in complete disarray, yeah, like because of the way I went and like various other life factors, like just to mention, because this is what actually makes it make sense. I have been diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. I'm medicated. I have been in what I heard recently from my new primary care provider, and I've been in remission for like going on 6 years. So like no major issues like between actual psychiatric psychiatrist prescribed medication and like talk therapy and like having a community of people that I keep myself accountable with and that are supportive. I've been able to essentially turn this thing, which was like the biggest weakness for me, into probably my greatest strength. And then, like that's kind of a big part too of why like my path has been so meandering, because it's been hard to have any kind of stability for a long time. I was 26 when I got sober, and I was 28 or 29 when I was diagnosed with bipolar. So I was like 2.5 years sober by the time I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And it made a lot of sense then, because I was like, well, like I've stopped this thing. I've been lucky enough to find a group of people that have a common problem and they've agreed on this common solution that works for them. And they've showed me what they did and that worked for me too. Right. I mean, like the world is what it is, but that particular group of people still has a particular tradition, which I actually do honor. So I'm not going to specifically state it, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. Now that was a massive help for me, but then it's like, well, why is my world still like flying all around? Like why can't anything stick? Why aren't things getting better? And part of the reason is because like I'm a real alcoholic, right? It's not just the alcohol that was the problem. It's like my thinking. And for me, part of that thinking problem was the fact that I live with now, and like I manage this particular condition and experience that just, unabated causes you to live at the polar, intentional use of that word, extremes of life, of emotion. You can be the highest of the high and you can be the lowest of the low, neither of which are very safe, that fun to be around in the long term, or conducive to building a life. Might be okay for the moment, especially if you feel really good, if you're in a manic state, but over a long period of time, it's absolutely detrimental to long-term welfare. So those were the things that stopped me from doing certain things that I wanted to do. Like I'd always wanted to get into acting, and I was never able to get my life stable enough to where I could like do that as well as do another thing. I would lose jobs. I would lose all these different things. So for a long time, my degree didn't matter to me because I could barely hold any kind of job. Like, like I've been like a carpenter's assistant. I've worked landscaping, I've dug ditches. I've been like a bartender. I've been like a caterer. Still now I'm a golf caddy, as among the other things that I do. It's like I've done all these different things where like don't require my degree, but if I had taken them to a certain level, then it would have been really useful. But I haven't even had cause for it to kick in because I haven't been able to build any kind of career. Whereas now in the last, like 4 or 5 years, I've been able to gradually get stability where acting is something that I pursue, and I pursue it consistently. I was able to write a movie with my friend. He said, I've got this story. It's an idea. You want to write it with me? Because I made a short film with him before. I said, absolutely. I love it. And we worked on it. And then, like it's been something that I've been able to continually come back to when it's appropriate to do that. And then in my own personal finances, with my wife, like the two of us bringing ours together and like talking about different things and planning and all these things. That's where my degree has actually come in helpful for me, honestly. Like that's the only places now, hopefully going forward. I will have like the shape and the scope and the size of something that like needs to bring in all these other skills that are still somewhat there from studying like business management, organizational behavior, you know. One random little thing that I actually have picked up from my degree that I do like using now and then is like the ability to like read statistics, because we have to take like a couple of different stats courses, and I actually really liked it. I read the book for economics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it
Famous
just
book.
clicked. Yeah, it just clicked with me, and I was like, this is great. And then it's one of those things where when it clicks, it's no longer like homoscedastic, like heterosced, like what, like they could be speaking Latin for all I knew, like, or Greek or whatever it was. But then it just made sense, and I learned the language. So like that stuff, actually looking at different statistical things and like statistical thinking is actually useful. Just because you can think like, oh, is this a cause or is this a correlation? And digging into those kind of things makes a lot of sense. Just to understand the world around you. And I think that part of it is helpful, because what you need to do as an artist, as an actor, as a writer, is understand the world around you. And you have to the best of your ability, you have to step inside the shoes of someone else, whether you're writing a character or whether you're like getting acquainted with the imaginary circumstances of the role that you're playing. And you have to try and immerse yourself as much as possible. And any different lens that you can put on a situation to get a different insight and get a different perspective on it is incredibly helpful.
That's very interesting.
I know it's like massively tangential.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear it, because that's the first time I'm ever hearing someone talk about it in general, right? So it's like a learning experience for me personally, and then I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy hearing that again. And probably like them, I'm going to go back and listen to again to really absorb it. But there's a lot of tadbits, whatever you want to say, in there that really resonates personally for me, because one, it seems like you've been through a lot, right? And people have heard my story, the listeners in the previous episodes. We both suffered through adversity. We both lost our fathers young, and it seems like I had my moments where I was down, and definitely things that I regret to this date, that things happen, whatever. I fell from my faith. I definitely, it was a very low time. But eventually I tried, like you, I fixed it. I figured it out. I had people around me that supported me and loved me and helped me get out of it, like my wife and, my girlfriend at the time, and now my wife. Um, and made it through. So it's really nice to hear somebody else that can succeed even through adversity that you've discussed, because a lot of people just let that take over them, and it destroys them, and then they can never get back out. I mean, maybe the chances get lower and lower as you get older, because let's face it, a lot of things change, and market caters to younger people most of the time, like
Yeah.
like acting, right? Like how much do you see older people acting, unless it's a role for an older person, they usually go in for the new bloods, am I right?
Yeah.
Or I don't know,
No,
I
it's
could be wrong.
correct. It ups to the degree of difficulty. Even me now, like I'm 35 years old. That's not exactly old in a lot of senses, but like in this game, like I'm not a spring chicken, and those things have actually cost me, they've cost me time and they've cost me opportunity. I have like literally had opportunities before that I couldn't take advantage of because at the time I was still unwell, and like I've bridges that I've burned because of my behavior. Like, as someone who, like, I was not drunk at the time, I was not high at the time, I was just mentally unwell at the time, and that's something that I have to come to terms with. And where appropriate, I've like made amends in those situations. And it's a tough pill to swallow. It really is sometimes, but it's also the back of this thing that I wanted to say. I just thought about it as you were sharing your experience too, that, like this stoic concept of things. Like I've always been interested in different philosophies, right? And like philosophy and faith, there's a lot of similarities, and like basically it's this frame that you can put and like around the world, and like there's at least this lens that you can look at the world through. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. But then also tying it back into like, you know, the telling of story. It's like for a character in a story, how they react to different things depends on how they frame it, right? So, and like the first time I encountered this particular concept was in the behavioral economics, like with Kahneman and Tversky talking about like framing. Particularly, it's like something as simple as like you find $100 on the street. You're going to spend that $100 differently than if you worked all day and you earned that $100. Why? Like that, I was like, that's so crazy because it's true. I knew it intuitively to be true, right? And then like everyone else in the class shared, yeah, that's I probably would. It's like, well, why is that? Like, it's because it's framed, yeah, but like, why does the mind think that way? And that fascinated me.
Wait, why is the answer? Because I would absolutely do that.
I don't know what the absolute reason is, but you know, like you haven't earned this thing, right? So in a sense, you think that it's just free. It's like it doesn't exist. Like it's like the sweat and the toil for the $100 that you get as pay. Your pay, you relate very differently to a windfall. Like people, if they experience a windfall, if like someone passes away or whatever, they tend to spend the money differently for whatever reason psychologically, because they're not as attached to it for whatever reason. You know, it's like you haven't had to go through a process to gain this thing, so you don't really appreciate it. If you think about like, you know, trust fund people, I know some that are incredible human beings and that like have their head screwed on and like are so savvy with their money, and then you see others that like are just like doing like the dumbest things ever and like spending money like it's crazy, right? Because it's like they didn't have to do anything to earn it, right? It's not real to them. So it's like that $100 that you find on the street, it's not real to you, really, in a way. But the way that you frame these things makes a big impact on your behavior, right? So not that whole thing of behavioral economics and like stories about how people behave in given circumstances under certain conditions, and then you're able to empathize with them and be like, is this what I would do? And like you can in a way like map yourself onto them, and you're like, oh, you start to feel what they would feel because you put yourself into their place. It's like, you know, like people who read fiction tend to be more empathetic, like in, you know, certain parts of the brain, like you can actually map it with fMRI, and it's like those people, like when they're reading it, those areas of the brain are actually larger, you know, because they use them more for whatever it is, the connections that tend to have you empathize with another human being.
Does that
for me,
Star Wars fans like us?
It better. It better. I mean, what better example of the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
But the whole thing of it is that it's how you frame these things or your perspective on these things. So, right, like we've had these moments of adversity, right? So you have the loss of a loved one, you have the loss of a father figure, which is seminal in so many different stories. Like you look at Superman, Batman, you know, Spider-Man doesn't have his parents, you know, like all these different things, right? It's big and it impacts how you behave in the world, right? And it, those frames or those lenses color or dictate or influence how you encounter the world around you and how you behave. And that whole thing of behavior is so crucial to an actor and to a writer. It's like, how would someone behave in this circumstance? What's a realistic behavior? What's unrealistic? What's a dramatic behavior? All these different things. But, you know, like having these basically like boulders, you know, in the way, right? Having these obstacles, like Marcus Aurelius talks about, like the obstacle becoming the way, right? You know, it's like you think that this thing is just a thing that's in your way and you just need to get it out of the way, but like this thing is actually the way. Like how you deal with this is your life, you know, like it is the whole journey. It's like you can say these things happen to me, poor me, I'm going to lie down and like, I'm just going to let people feel sorry for me and whatever. And I've done that at periods in my life, you know, like I'm not proud to say it, but it is. That hasn't been beneficial for me. That hasn't been beneficial for anyone around me. Thankfully, I've been lucky enough to encounter different people and different things, and you know, really been lucky enough to be guided back to a manner of living in which my personal pain and adversity is not my sole focus. My sole focus is like, how can I make sure that like life is better for those around me? You know, like how can I use my experiences and turn like the mess of my life into my message? You know, how can I take this pain of mine and use it so that somebody else suffers a little less from theirs in the future, you know?
Yeah.
And part of that journey is like this thing of this group of people that have this common problem and this common solution. You know, they suggested that maybe I try and find a conception of God that was palatable for me. And for me at that moment in time, and for years previous to, there hadn't been one. You know, like I had this faith in whatever it was, and it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me at that moment in time. But then, like, you know, like my father passed away, like, you know, basically like damning God, whatever that means, to do that. You know, like, and a turning of my back on that, and everything that meant to me, and just that it means in general. And I was lucky enough to just basically have my whole life fall apart, and whatever psychological construction I had of that I thought of as myself fell apart, and I was able to start putting pieces back together, and I was able to be open to things and ideas and an experience of like God and faith that was mine, that was nobody else's, that draws on a lot of different things, that like someone can say one word and it can mean a completely different thing to me than it can to them, and I can let them mean something different to them, and I know what it means to me, you know. And like I think through like being personally accountable and having and claiming and developing agency and sovereignty for myself, right? It has allowed me to exist in the world and associate with other people as if they had that personal sovereignty and agency in a way that I was never able to do before. Like it's all almost like, you know, it was a main character syndrome. It was like everyone just like lived to like service whatever I needed from them at the time, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, like when things are good, that's not how I live anymore. I still slip back into different moments and whatever. And whether it's me getting caught up in a resentment or, you know, like however that manifests itself, like whether I'm being sarcastic or, you know, like little things like that are just like the weakest little like defense mechanisms. Like they're pathetic, really. Like they're funny kind of sometimes, but they're not useful. They're not helpful, you know. And if I can recognize that stuff and like correct it, you know, to say that like it's a life beyond your wildest dreams, like doesn't even like touch the actual experience of it, because it's not even about dreams. It's just, it's so much more worthwhile being present and being there for other people rather than just trying to get what you need at any given moment in time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this has been I'm just floored by what you're saying. It's incredible. I'm so grateful for you sharing this and your story. And um, I have a lot of questions, and this interview can easily turn now into like a 2-3 hour session. And
we might need one.
Yeah, we might need to do another part because
you're going to be in the attic for the next one.
Okay, just for you, I will do that one just to get more out of you like that. One question I want to ask you as I'm listening to you is, at what point, I guess this is very tacky to say, But when did you truly find God, and when did it start helping you?
I found God when I realized that it wasn't me, you know, and when I behaved like it wasn't me. Because there's a lot of people that you meet, and I can think of several specific people at this very moment in time that claim piety and claim to be holy in a way, who do not live in any way that is attractive to me whatsoever, that are not inclusive, that are not merciful, that are not like just attractive, like that. It's something that I want to be around, that I want to emulate. Like I was lucky enough to meet a lot of people that like their life was just about doing something for someone else and expecting nothing in return. I'm just getting emotional thinking about it. It's like there's so few people out there who really do that, who don't like blow a trumpet and like look at me on social media, look at this great thing I did. Like there's a lot of people out there that help a lot of people anonymously, silently, quietly, so effectively, because they're not trying to get anything from them. They're just trying to help them. And when I saw that, and when I was able to, like, to a certain degree, just drop any notion that I had before and be like, that's the way to live, that's when I started to like experience that presence of God, and it's not it's a thing that you can even really describe. I mean, it's a strange thing to talk about, especially considering the fact that like I'm bipolar as well. So it's like could easily be conceived as a manic episode. But like, I think I've had both at the same time. I think so. Like, I've been blessed, and like I'll tell a quick funny story on that. So, I'm like at this stage in the story, I'm not sober that long, probably like 4 or 5 months, maybe 5 or 6 months. And I'm just like, I'm walking up and down the streets of New York, like I'm in there, and like I'd gone in to hang out with this girl who was a bartender. Genius decision of mine, newly sober, hanging out with the bartender, but she's a nice girl. And I just like had nothing to do that day, and I was walking up and down the streets. And I was like, I could go in here and say hello to this person because I knew different people bartending at different spots and whatever. And I was like, oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Like literally standing outside these bars, like man, like I didn't really know what I was doing, and I'm just like walking from like the West Village until I like essentially like come to, and I realize that I'm standing right beside St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is like, it's not a short walk. So I go in, and like, I'm pretty new to prayer in this new iteration of myself. So like prayer for me was a thing where like growing up, I said prayers. It was like, like the ones that my mom taught me. And like, I had this kind of relationship that I developed with God, I thought, or whatever it was. But I can see it now, but at the time, like, yeah, there's like, you're genuine to a degree, but I had a transactional relationship. And like, that doesn't really work when you're trying to have a transactional relationship with a being that, by definition, like is all of the omnis, is like omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. It's like they don't really need anything from you. So the transaction thing, it's not going to work out too well for you. It's pretty one-sided. And when my father passed away, there was a certain period of time afterwards, I just remember I stopped praying, and I remember this like closing off of this part of myself, whatever that meant. This like part of existence, this part of life, was just closed to me. And it was a big deal for me. I had a big resentment of the fact that this happened to me, because like, how dare you do this to me? Like, I was a good kid, like I didn't drink, I did the right thing, I thought it was great, like why would you do this? Like the reality is, like, it's not personal. Life just happens, like God didn't take away my father and my mother's husband. It's just like died, like it was sudden. Like he could have looked after himself better. There's all these different things, but the reality is he just died. Like nobody killed him or anything. Like thank God, that'd be another layer to add onto the onion. But like that was just the reality of what happened. And you know, like I was being pretty selfish. I was being like pretty childish and like a bit of a brat about the whole thing to a large degree. And I was running from my pain and from my grief. I just spoke with a buddy of mine recently about this. We were texting on WhatsApp anyway, because another one of our buddies, his dad passed away suddenly. He just had a heart attack again. I think he was actually swimming, like fit guy, 65, but like, you know, he's just swimming the sea every day, you know, just crazy, you know. And you know, so my other buddy, he lost his father when he was 5. So like he still carries that with him. He still has that wound there, you know. And unfortunately for him, like he hasn't yet had the ability to access the tools or the space that he needs to be able to start to heal that. So we were talking about it briefly, and just I could tell that he was sad, and I, you know, just kind of shared like, you know, different things, and just like, you know, yeah, look, like I feel like I'm still coming to from like running away from my grief, you know, / a rolling blackout for 8 years, you know. It's like,
Wow.
and yeah, and I was just like, you know, like I just feel like I'm just getting my head back on my shoulders this last couple of years. Like that was like, it's 8 years ago, like was the last time that I had a drink, and it's like that's how long it's taken for like me to like gain level in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5, like just to really start to like feel like I'm on terra firma again. And
good for you, man.
Oh, thanks. And you know, like I'm talking to him about it. It's obvious to me that like he hasn't been able to like go through this process that I'm about to tell you. Like basically was the genesis of the whole thing. You know, he's carrying it with him, and he hasn't been able to be vulnerable with anyone that will be able to give him the tools to start to manage and heal this particular wound, because it's a deep wound. It's a psychic wound, you know, it's a spiritual wound. And I just remember, because I went into this church, you know, and I go like straight down, and like you can't see it at the moment, but my hair was a little bit longer than it is now, which right now it's about shoulder length, so it was a little bit longer. Beard was a good bit chunkier, so I was pretty beardy. And I walked down.
I would say homeless. That looks kind of homeless to me.
Homeless Jesus.
Yeah.
So like I basically like park myself in a pew in like the middle of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I start to pray, and I start to weep, and I weep uncontrollably, like not like cool in a movie, like one big tear or 3 small ones, like like snot, like it's ugly. So like I'm like, for the first time, I'm really starting to grieve my father. You know, I'd had moments before, but like it was usually when I was drunk or whatever. Like I think I cried when I closed the coffin. Basically, that was it. And then like just a couple of like intermittent spells when I was drinking over the years, but that was it. I couldn't really access that. I was too afraid of it. So I started to access this thing, and I also am opening the door to this old part of my life. And it was a powerful, powerful experience for me. And that was the beginning of like developing a relationship with, I mean, like, what is a God of my misunderstanding? You know, it's like this new thing that I don't know, which is so powerful for me and which is so essential, like that I don't like think I know the thing, you know, the thing that's like ineffable, means you can't know it, but I thought I knew it, you know. It's just like so crazy, but that's the way it was for me. You know, like I get up and I'm walking out and I light a candle for my father or whatever, and as I leave the church, I realized that like for all intents and purposes, like a bunch of like tourists, like there's like, you know, like Japanese tourists like taking pictures and whatever, which like I don't think you're supposed to do in the cathedral. You know, I've just witnessed like possibly something resembling like the second coming, like the homeless second coming, come in and collapse and weep in the church, which was probably how he actually would feel, given the state of things. But yeah, that's just a funny story about like the beginning of my relationship with God. It's not from any kind of lofty place. It's really from this place of like personal weakness, and in that personal weakness, like there being access to the spiritual strength and just the inward looking, you know, like that it's like there is some element of God within me. And I reflect that I'm in his image when I'm acting in certain ways. And those certain ways look something like when I do a good deed and expect nothing in return.
Yeah, it's kind of lost for words. I mean, it's just incredible to hear this. So I really, really do again appreciate you sharing with me and the listeners. And I mean, personally, again, feel for you because of what you experienced and looking at it in my own lens. I also feel like I guess I've never truly have coped properly for the loss of my father and my mother. So hearing how you've done it and what you've been through and what it really means shows me that I guess I've never really been there yet, and I guess it's never, I mean, the listeners heard my stories. I just never had the time to, it's always been the next thing and the next thing,
Mm.
another loss, another failure. So, it's just, I thank you. I mean, it really, I really do want to bring you back again. So since you got a couple minutes left, I'm not going to ask you what's the best and worst moments of your life, since I think
Pretty
you've
much went there.
pretty much shared it. Yeah,
The same moment,
yeah.
which is crazy.
I know it's phenomenal. It's going to be great to put that together when I put the notes down. But if you could quickly share with us the 5 essential things you think are needed to succeed, I guess in life.
Mm.
It's been very spiritual and really important to hear about your life. Or your career that you can share with the listeners, and it doesn't have to be 5; it could be 1 or 2, whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did give that a brief bit of thought. Hopefully, my subconscious has been working away on it this whole time, and it'll kick up something much better than whatever I've got available at the surface right now. I think for me, like wellness is essential, right? So, like, you have to have this element, and I don't mean it in like this like new age, like let's claim that chamomile cures cancer kind of way. I mean it in the sense that like you have to be well enough psychologically. So like with your own mental state, you have to be well enough spiritually. I really do think in my experience, like you have to be living in a way that like you can abide by, like whatever that is, whatever frame or lens you want to put on life, and you have to pick these ideals. For me, that's what the spiritual life's about, and then to really honestly check in with yourself, like, so I guess maybe to like invert that too, is like you got to have honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, right? And on top of those things, you got to be able to have a psychological, spiritual, and physical life that is well enough to go and do the things that you want to do. And in all aspects of life that I have experienced thus far, I have never been hurt by my honesty. Apart from the one time I admitted that I was the one who did something stupid when a teacher was out of the classroom. And I fessed up to it. It was me, and he praised me for being honest more than he chastised me for the indiscretion. But I was still punished. But you know what it did? It put a credit in my account in my life, and I think you do that. Like, people talk about emotional bank accounts and whatever, all these different things, but it put a credit in my account for sure on that side of the ledger. That was very certain. That was like, okay, like I could have got away with this. I could have been a coward about it. I could have done whatever, and I'm actually going to get whooped for it. Like I'm in an amount of trouble that is sizable. Like for who I was at the time, it was pretty good, and I could have got away with it, and people could have shared the blame. But I didn't, and I did the right thing, and I knew what that felt like. So to have like enough of those touch points, and then you're also going to have all these other touch points where like you're going to do the wrong thing, you're going to know what that feels like, right? So like if you have like a well spiritual life, you're still going to like act out, you're going to do the wrong thing, but you know what it feels like, so then you can make amends with it. So it's like, yes, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, wellness, and amends. Just tidying up your mess, because you're going to make them.
Yeah, those are great. Did you want to add something else?
No, I think that's fine, right? I don't get
Yeah,
greedy.
no, that's great. Nigel, this has been a phenomenal interview. Thank you so much for sharing all these personal details and being so open with us. I just can't thank you enough. So I appreciate it. I just want to ask you, is it okay for the listeners to reach out to you, or, how would you like to do that?
Yeah, sure. I don't have any of the socials, as they're called these days. I think I have LinkedIn floating around somewhere that was made in somewhat jest when I'd watched the movie Thank You for Smoking. It has a picture of me as a 7-month-old baby as my profile cover. But if anyone does want to get in touch, give your information to Dr. Nobody, and I'll get back at you as soon as I can.
All right. Great. Listeners, I hope you gained plenty of insights today. This is the beginning of becoming a someone, but specifically the someone you always wanted to be. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please do give me a like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also visit my website, thedrnobodypodcast.com, to learn more about my guests and listen to the episode again, share it, and much more. Thanks again for listening to Dr. Nobody Podcast, where we turn nobodies to somebodies. Talk to you all very soon.